after the fact, so you'll be able to click on these links as well, so to kind of give a bit of background to values-based recruitment and the kind of core values and attributes that are needed to study medicine. So I suppose broadly speaking now, with that in mind, that we're really, as a medical school or as medical training professionals, looking towards people, young people, any people that are really all-rounders, that are no longer purely academic or purely critical or, you know, purely caring. It's really important that, I think, with a patient-centered, holistic approach to care now in the modern NHS, that the doctors we are recruiting are all-rounders and are able to do a bit of everything. That they have key values and attributes that are important and that they can work together for patients ultimately. That the values and attributes that they have are in line with those NHS values that I mentioned briefly earlier on. We want young people to be able to demonstrate these values, these attributes, these skills, and we do that by testing them at various different parts of the admissions process, and I'll kind of go into specifics a little bit later on. What's really key though, I think, is it's all well and good saying that you're resilient, saying that you're honest, saying that you're conscientious or you're academic or you're caring, but it's more important actually that young people can demonstrate, and they actually have concrete examples and evidence of when they've been able to demonstrate these key attributes and values. So flashing up on your screen are 4 or 5 that we really, I think, have identified as being very important. We want young people to have a natural interest, to be keen on science, from the point of view that medicine is really applying scientific knowledge into real world, real patients and real scenarios. But ultimately, the first couple of years of a medical degree is a science degree. No matter how a medical school might dress it up in terms of extra early clinical practice and other kind of more broad-ranging curriculum, it's still a science degree, and students have to have that innate interest and keen scientific ability as well. And then we're kind of looking at some of the more, I suppose, soft skills, the ability to communicate and work with other people, working as part of a team, but also willing to lead a team. It's quite a common interview question, I think, is discussing when you've led or when you've followed, and kind of how you or how candidates as members of the team might step up if necessary, that kind of thing. And then we are certainly looking at how young people, how prospective applicants do cope with stress, difficult situations, this idea of resilience, this idea of learning from errors, from mistakes or from difficult situations, and becoming back a better, a stronger person, somebody who's more well-rounded or more aware of their limitations, for example. And like I said, we are very much increasingly asking candidates to demonstrate these things or do these things as part of our selection processes, and we use various aptitude tests and interview techniques in order to get candidates to demonstrate that they are able to do these kind of things. So there's a few sort of key attributes that we've identified, and then there are certain things that might come under a little bit more sort of values-based, and there's a few just sort of flashing up now that you might consider. You know, we're asking them in terms of the way that we question an interview to show compassion and to show empathy, to develop their problem-solving skills through things like aptitude tests and admissions tests, just to kind of show us that they're able to solve problems and think critically. Honesty and probity is very much a common theme around interview questions, and kind of finding out whether or not young people are innately honest and innately able to do the right thing in terms of different situations. And then certain, you might have heard the phrase mini-multiple interviews or multiple mini-interviews. It's an interviewing technique that medical schools are increasingly using, and finding out if candidates are able to show these kind of values. Thinking critically as well is really, really important. So there's a few examples, I suppose, of values there that you might consider if you're thinking about applying to medicine, if you are a careers advisor, how you might be able to encourage applicants to think about how and when they've shown these different values, skills and attributes, and having those concrete examples, I think, is quite a common theme around medical schools selection processes. So as well as obviously skills, values, and attributes, we're kind of looking at a certain amount of knowledge. Ultimately, this goes back to the fact that we are recruiting a workforce. There is something that some people may or may not know, that actually probably about 80 or 90% of doctors, so graduates, medical school graduates, won't have another interview for their junior doctor placement. So with that in mind, they kind of go through quite a complex application form, and they're ranked according to their academic scores and their sort of CV that they've built up while being at medical school. But they're not necessarily interviewed. It's quite a complex UCAS type application system, but they're not interviewed. So we need to be sure, as a medical school, that we are recruiting people who have an awareness and an understanding of what it means to be in the job, being a doctor, being a frontline doctor in today's NHS. And obviously that NHS may change in 5 years, 6 years by the time they graduate, but we certainly need them to have an understanding of what medicine is like as a profession, what it's really like to be a junior doctor, and an appreciation of their future employer. Because, as I say, the vast majority of medical school students will go on to work for the NHS. They have to, as part of the foundation training program, and being aware of your employer, much like any other interview for a job. You'd expect them to know a little bit about what they're getting themselves into and who they're going to be working for. So there's an element of knowledge that we like to see and to ask prospective applicants to demonstrate, and again that could be as part of an admissions process, a test, or through their personal statement, or at interview itself. All right, so there's some knowledge and awareness of certain things that applicants need to be aware of too. So it's all well and good saying that you must have this experience, or that you must have this knowledge, you must have these values, you must have these attributes. Where kind of this next slide goes back to this idea that we're looking for candidates to be able to demonstrate these values and attributes, whether that's in the form of providing an example, something that they've been through or they've done or they've seen, observed, etc., or that they can actually carry out as part of the selection or interview process. And there's a lot of information out there on getting work experience, but ultimately candidates need work experience, not just to say that they've done it, to say that they've spent time in a hospital, to say that they understand the clinical setting. And actually we're aware that clinical placements are very difficult and very competitive and hard to come by for many young people, many applicants. So it's not just that applicants need to say that they've got 2 weeks or X number of weeks worth of work experience, but it's actually providing them with a platform and an opportunity to demonstrate some of the values and attributes that I talked about earlier. And that's really why medical schools ask candidates to have some kind of work experience, and it definitely does not have to be in a clinical setting. It's not about what the candidate has actually done or carried out or observed. It's more about what they've learned and what they've been able to demonstrate from whatever that experience might be. So I'm going to flash up a few ideas, a few things that I like, a few options that applicants might consider, and it's important around these options that applicants really determine the kind of skills and values that they will have the opportunity to demonstrate in those kind of experiences. So we've got just standard work experience, I suppose, hospital placements, GP placements, if you can get it. To be honest, ultimately, I don't feel that it's a necessity. I think it's important to be aware of the clinical environment, and if a young person, a prospective applicant, is inspired by working in that clinical environment, then that's a really positive thing. But ultimately, they're taught how to be doctors and taught how to work in hospitals as part of the medical curriculum. So I don't think it's absolutely necessary. I think the kind of skills and attributes can be demonstrated in a variety of ways, and that understanding of what actually goes on in a clinical setting can be garnered or gleaned from other areas as well. So people might consider things like pharmacies, chemists, that sort of stuff as well, in addition to focusing solely on I must have a week of work experience in the hospital, because that's simply not true. I really like health stores and undertakers, if you kind of think of the sort of communication skills that people will be developing by working in, for example, Boots or Holland and Barrett, for example, or certainly the kind of empathy and compassion element that they might get if they're exposed to places like an Undertaker's. I'm not saying that everyone should go out and get work experience at an Undertaker's, but just consider the type of values and attributes that an applicant would develop by putting themselves into those kind of positions. Likewise, working in cafes, restaurants, this idea of teamwork and communication, communicating with the public, I think is really, really undervalued and should certainly be seen as really useful work experience. And obviously in restaurants and cafes, particularly those young people under the age of 18 can actually start getting paid for their kind of work. So that provides a little bit of opportunity for income there as well. And then the sort of volunteering options as well, you know, charity shops, working in youth clubs, all the sort of useful things that people can undertake to really develop their skills working with people that are different from themselves. So, you know, whether that's with the general public, whether that's with elderly people, you know, kind of people that they will be exposed to as medical students and will have to communicate and work with, and obviously as doctors as well. So work experience doesn't have to be clinical in terms of hospital GP. There are lots and lots of other opportunities out there, and I think it's really valuable that when somebody applies and explains their work experience in their personal statement, if they've done something slightly different, slightly out of the box, I think that's really, really useful. So other things like reading, there are some really useful things online. One of those, I think, is the NHS. You'll see it there, hashtag behind the headlines. It's a really good website. The NHS have got a team of people that take current healthcare-based news stories and really desensationalize them. So they really get behind the research. You might see, I don't know, something, for example, in the Daily Mail, chocolate makes you smarter, a random headline like that. And actually the NHS Behind the Headlines team will delve a little bit more into the research and present a more critical kind of analysis of that headline, which can be useful certainly for young people to kind of take this idea of that inherent science. Tell me about something you've read scientific recently that they might get asked at an interview. So have a look at that one as well. And then certainly extracurricular activities can be really, really beneficial. Again, that idea of teamwork, leadership, some of those skills and values that competitiveness, I think is the extracurricular activities can be really, really valuable to people that often young people take for granted, or they don't necessarily identify as developing their own skills, developing their own attributes. So it's important, I think, to look at the stuff that you're doing already and how that might fit into applying to medical school. So definitely don't disregard extracurricular activities, and certainly throughout the application process, don't stop them. It's really important that you have an outlet in terms of applying to medicine, and while you're at medical school as well. We'll look for people who do things, slightly different things, or that can bring a different approach, or can add value to the medical school community. So I think extracurricular stuff is certainly worth continuing and sort of thinking about what you get out of those kind of activities. And likewise, admissions officers, current medical school students, if you can get hold of them. This is why I was mentioned earlier on reaching out to your local medical school. Is there anyone that can come and speak to our students? Is there anyone that we can get hold of? Have you got ex-alumni that are now at medical school that might be able to come back over the summer, but they get long holidays still, certainly in their first and second years? There's still opportunities for them to come back and speak to those that are in year 12, year 13 that are thinking about applying. So keep a network. And start maintaining a network if you don't already, would be some of my advice. All right then, so I suppose all that chat about skills, values, attributes, some of you will be wondering actually how we go about this, and I'm going to be covering a few things, and I suppose a lot of this will be my personal thoughts on the application process, and kind of what sort of general trends in terms of how medical schools do select the best applicants. So there's a few methods that which we use, most of which I'm sure you've already heard of if you've done any kind of research into applying to medicine in the UK, but I'll just kind of present them and kind of go through them and sort of talk about that kind of each individual element. All right, so first up, I suppose we've got academic requirements, and medicine, whilst reasonably complex, I think isn't necessarily the most difficult or demanding subject matter. I think the reason why medical schools require such high academic criteria is simply because of the volume, the amount of work that an undergraduate student would be expected to get through. So academic requirements are generally very high. I'm not going to go into all of the detail of every single medical school here. We'd be here until tomorrow morning. So it's really down to the applicant to ensure that they have the right, they're applying to the medical schools that they fit the academic criteria for. I do believe that people don't necessarily do enough research around this, around academic requirements. Handily, the Medical Schools Council, as part of that Selecting for Excellence work, now publish every year a PDF document, which again I'll link to at the end, that lists every single medical school's academic requirements, entry requirements, admissions tests, for you. I mean, I think there are other private institutions and organisations that probably do a similar thing, but certainly the Medical Schools Council will be accurate. I would hazard to guess it's probably one of the most accurate out there. So there's a link to the 2017 one at the end of this, but obviously if you're thinking about sixth form, if you're in year 12, you'll be applying next year, then the new one will probably likely come out around February, March. So every medical school is different. Do your research. Absolutely, really, really important. Broadly, though, medical schools expect reasonably strong GCSEs, but obviously each medical school uses different GCSEs in a different way. For example, BSMS, we're only looking for Bs in GCSE Maths and English. Other medical schools will be expecting or given sort of like a point system towards their applications, and they would expect the successful applicants to be getting, 5 or 6 A stars and the rest A's, for example. And obviously as GCSEs change over the course of the next couple of years, we'll be expecting probably 8s and 9s in the new system there as well. But I think will it be next year by the time we get onto applicants with 8s and 9s in their GCSEs? So obviously the medical schools will adjust their criteria accordingly. A-levels, I mean, it's pretty much as a minimum now 3 A's, some are A star, AA, and each institution requires 1 or more sciences, and they'll stipulate it's often biology and chemistry, or chemistry and one other. I think there's one medical school that are asking for 1 science, so it could be chemistry, physics, biology. So again, every medical school is different. It's really, really important that young people, or any people, do their research. Some institutions, there are 1 or 2 this year that are still using AS levels, still expecting people to have AS levels, and potentially if people aren't offered AS levels, if applicants aren't offered AS levels, to have confirmation from their school college. So there are 1 or 2 still using AS levels. They like it as a sort of predictor of their A-level grades, I suppose. But again, really, really important that we do our research. IB, for those, if anybody's an IB school out there, it's broadly 36 to 40 points, 6s and 7s at sciences, higher level sciences usually. Again, research, everyone's different. It's starting to sound like a broken record, so I think we'll probably move on with that. Personal statements now. I've got some personal opinions on personal statements, some of which I will share, but I'd just be quite interested to kind of hear your take as admissions, as careers advisors, as prospective students, your take on what you think about personal statements. So if you wouldn't mind just perhaps typing into the questions or the chat box. I don't know if you have the chat box available to you. You might be able to type in there or into the questions box, kind of people's thoughts on personal statements, and we'll kind of see if we can address some of them. Broadly, a personal statement is a 4,000 characters document that they submit, an applicant will submit alongside their UCAS forms, and they are used in lots of different ways by medical schools. Some hardly use them. BSMS is not using personal statements in any part of the selection process this year. And some use them as a sort of weighting or a factor of their overall selection process. Very, very few are using selecting solely, in terms of selecting to interview solely on personal statements. And some use them at interview to kind of form questions of the person in front of them, to kind of find out a bit more about them and ask them more questions around personal statements. In any case, I mean, it's certainly true that no medical school is looking for a list of stuff that applicants have done. We're not looking for a list. We're very much looking for we're not looking for descriptive experience either. We're looking for real reflection around the lessons that they have learned and what an experience or an observation has taught them, and how that makes them that's going to help them as a medical student or become a good doctor. A lot of people, when they're conducting or sort of formulating their personal statement, will get that reflection element. You know, I saw this and it taught me that, but actually they don't provide any context as to why that's going to be useful for them as a medical student or how that might inform their practice as a doctor. Because ultimately that's what we're looking for. We're looking for young people or prospective applicants' suitability to be a doctor. And there's a temptation, I think, for those applicants who have quite long CVs or do quite a lot of things to really try and cram all of that in. And I don't think that that's always necessary. I think quantity should certainly make way for quality in this instance, and that actually applicants can get a lot out of just 1 or 2 or 3 experiences rather than trying to get in absolutely everything that they've done, whether that's work experience, observation, charity work, you know, volunteering, all that sort of stuff, extracurricular things. So I think there is a temptation to try and cram everything into 4,000 characters, but I think that sometimes detracts from that reflection. So be wary of that, actually, and expand potentially a little bit more on the 3 or 4 experiences or observations that you would like to put in. Something that I would like to highlight is actually something I've come across recently from some prospective applicants, saying that their schools and colleges are advising them in their personal statement to talk about their academic achievements or what they're getting from their A-levels or IB, whatever that might be. Now, as an admissions tutor, I personally don't think that talking about your A-levels has any value whatsoever, because frankly, everyone, or the vast majority of people that are applying, also have those A-levels and are also doing that broadly similar curriculum. So if applicants want to talk about their academic achievements, their academic ability, I think much more valuable is the additional academic work that they might be doing. So things like the EPQ or submitting for an essay, that kind of thing, I think would be much more valuable than talking about their A-level syllabus, chemistry or biology, and what they're getting from that. So that's something I wanted to highlight because I think it's very important, and that seems to be some potential misinformation that I've come across over the past few months with young people that have presented their personal statements to me. So as a kind of summary then around personal statements, we're really looking for their demonstration of their exploration of medicine as a career, what it entails, that they have a realistic understanding of medicine, and demonstrating their suitability and how they might become a good doctor, or certainly a medical student in the first instance, and then go on to be a good doctor. So remember those values, those attributes, and it's very much about reflection of what somebody has learned. So we'll move on, we'll leave personal statements for the time being. There's plenty of information you can find online about that. I would suggest that it's easy to spot a bad personal statement, but it's not so easy to determine the levels of good personal statements. So I think, and it's very subjective, so I think medical schools broadly are moving away from using personal statements wholly in their selection processes, and they're using other things or using personal statements as one factor of their overall process. So we'll move on quickly to admissions tests, and I don't want to go into too much detail about these because all the information is generally available online. But broadly, there are 2 that are used: the BMAT, the Biomedical Admissions Test, and the UK Clinical Aptitude Test. I think pretty much every institution now is using one admissions test. So if you apply to medicine, you will have to sit at least one, potentially both, depending on the institutions you want to apply to. There are about 7 or 8 using the BMAT, and the remainder, I believe, using the UK CAT for undergraduate admissions anyway. There's information online. Each sort of testing service publishes useful documentation, publishes past papers and examples of questions that you will be asked, and there are sort of sort of practice papers, and I really think that the best preparation that somebody can do is to practice, practice, practice. And medical schools all use these tests differently. Some use them as a sort of threshold or cut-off, so they will only consider applications from those who score above a certain threshold in each test. Others, again, use them as a factor or a weighting of a candidate's application alongside their academic record and alongside their personal statement. Others might use them solely for borderline cases in terms of applying to interview or to determine between candidates that might be broadly successful or on a similar level, who has the higher UKCAT test, for example. BSMS, as an example, we solely use the BMAT in terms of selecting for admission, selecting for interview. So we rank everyone according to their score, and we simply work down the list. It's fair, it's above board, everyone can see, everyone has the opportunity to resit or know where they've gone wrong in terms of applying again next year if they wish to. So again, contact UKCAT, contact the admissions testing service. I think it's really, really important. There's plenty of information online. I'm going to leave it there because it's tempting to get into quite a lot of detail around the admissions tests. So I guess one of the final ways in which we select our best applicants will be the interviews. And there are broadly 2 or 3 different types of interviews. I'm sure this is nothing that you haven't heard before, but just to kind of refresh, there's panel-based interviews. So typically your traditional style interviews where you've got 2 or 3 panel members, usually a member of faculty, potentially a healthcare professional. Some panels have medical students or patients as kind of lay people on board as well. And obviously each member of the faculty will be approaching the interview in a particular way. For an admissions tutor like myself, who's a non-medic, I like approaching traditional interviews from the point of view as, do I want this person treating me in 20 years' time? You know, so I think it's important that a panel is varied and that each candidate, each interviewer will be approaching this kind of traditional interview in a different way. There can be very structured panel-based interviews where candidates are asked a list of questions, they're all the same and they're judged upon their answers, or there's kind of semi-structured theme-based thematic interviews where they're not necessarily asked the same questions but panelists are looking to draw out certain knowledge, understanding, themes, examples of their values, attributes, etc. I will say that traditional panel-based interviews are slowly dying out. The Medical Schools Council published some information, some guidance to medical schools around the use of multiple interviews, or multiple mini interviews. I always get it the wrong way around. And that perhaps MMIs, as they're known, are a little bit more objective, a little bit fairer, and potentially a more suitable way of selecting potential candidates. So a lot of institutions are moving or have moved towards MMI format now, and these vary wildly in structure and format depending on the institution, and usually most institutions will publish a guide or some information that a candidate can access prior to their interview, so they're at least prepared in some form or another. But they are designed to bring those candidates out of their comfort zone, to test them, to put them into difficult situations, you know, kind of one of those key skills, to get them to concentrate on individual different stations. And they're broadly, I suppose, an overview would be 5 to 10 minute stations with 5 or 10 stations in the circuit, 5 to 10 I should say. It varies massively per institution, and I think it's important that a candidate is aware of potentially their interview process before applying, or certainly once they have applied. And we like these because they are objective. They mimic OSCEs, so objective structured clinical examinations, which is a method that medical students are we use to assess a medical student's clinical skills. So they're individual little stations that they will. So it kind of mimics that idea of them already being at medical school, and provides a bit of a flavour to interviewers, to admissions tutors, of how they would cope with that kind of examination as well. So again, do your research, and I think it's important when thinking about multiple mini interviews that candidates don't forget to prepare for the more traditional questions, because they do come up as part of these MMI stations. It's not always going to be a role play or presented with some data to analyse. There might just be a conversation station where a candidate is asked, why do you want to be a doctor? Or why do you want to come to this medical school? So I think it's important to prepare for the traditional type questions, even if you're thinking about, even if you've been asked to attend a multiple mini interview format. All right, so in each of these interview cases, I suppose we're looking for candidates to be able to demonstrate the skills, values, and attributes that have been set out by the NHS, by the MSc, the Medical Schools Council, either by demonstrating right there and then in the case of maybe a multiple mini interview role play type scenario, or by drawing on examples and demonstrative kind of things that they've experienced when they've been volunteering or through their additional study or at their work experience. So broadly, we're looking for candidates to be able to communicate well, to be willing to engage in discussion, in conversation with panelists. It's not just a one-way thing where a panelist asks questions and expects an answer. Certainly with the panel-based interviews, we are looking for candidates to engage with us, have a discussion, have a debate. You know, changing opinion is fine. You know, considering different things, different ideas is absolutely fine, as well as answering the questions that they are asked. So we're looking for that communication element, that ability to work with people, not be overawed by the occasion, by talking to the professor of medicine, for example, but that actually we're all working together for a patient and sort of being able to do that. So a broad overview of interviews there. Now I'm aware that I've kind of prattled on for about 45 minutes, so I will finish up very quickly and then potentially address some questions. I just wanted to finish by running a brief overview of potential dates. So this is dates for next year, next cycle. The early UCAS deadline will be the 15th of October. So the early UCAS deadline is for Oxbridge Medicine, I think veterinary sciences, potentially dentistry as well. So that's when candidates would apply, but the UK CAT is sat before they apply. So I think registration opens in May. So it'll be May 2017, and it will be sat between June and I think end of September. So the UK CAT admissions test, a candidate will have their score before they apply, and they can use that to potentially inform where they might apply. If they've got a good score, a very strong score, then perhaps they might consider applying to medical schools that favour it highly and use it as a significant element of their selection process. Whereas the BMAT, that other admissions test, is sat after application, which makes things a little bit more difficult for candidates because they don't necessarily know their BMAT score. They'll have already applied to 4 institutions, and they'll have to sit the BMAT if they choose a BMAT institution to apply to after, so they won't necessarily know how well they will do. This is sat the first week of November, usually a Wednesday, so whatever that day falls on. And then medical schools will be inviting to interview anytime sort of between the beginning of November right the way through till April. We see wild guesses and wild speculation on student forums. I won't mention names, but you know, when will they invite to interview? How many will be invited to interview? So candidates can expect an invite any time between November and April. And if they haven't heard back from an institution, it's because they're still considering them. They might receive confirmation or rejection in any this time as well between their 4 selected institutions that they've applied to. And obviously offers are made at various times. Some institutions will get in touch with candidates directly after their interview. Some institutions will wait for, you know, until they've interviewed everyone and then only make the offers. So just because you've had an interview, it doesn't mean you'll get an offer in the next week. Sometimes it will, but broadly, institutions will make it clear when they will make an offer. So so that's something to be aware of as well. And then finally, just kind of some personal things, some personal ideas that I think, particularly for schools, for careers advisors that are attached to schools, might be really, really valuable. And the first one is to kind of build this idea of a culture of aspiration, a culture of success. You know, be encouraging of applicants who are considering medicine. Obviously, there's an element of being realistic as well. They need to be academic. They need to be meeting their certain requirements. But I think it's really important to have that aspirational culture. And often, what I find best is the most successful, certainly state-based institutions, have a medical or a sort of medical veterinary dentistry society, so that students that are thinking about applying to medicine will all get together, and you can provide them tasks on, okay, so this week I want you to go away and research how institutions use the BMAT or how institutions use the UK CAT, and they can all come together and research and share knowledge. And that means that they're not necessarily having to do it all themselves, but they're sharing the load, and sort of that collaboration is a really important, working together is a really important element of medicine, and they can do that through this kind of a kind of medical or veterinary society, and get the students themselves to run it. That kind of teamwork, leadership is a really key attribute as well within becoming a medical student. Get them to run it, get them to organise guest speakers, reach out to local medical schools. They might have outreach officers or clinical staff that will be willing to give up their time to come and speak around admissions or speak around their particular area of specialty, for example. So I think it needs a little bit of tenacity, but I think having a kind of support network and a society can be really, really valuable. You can all get together once a week or once every 2 weeks and have an ethical debate, for example, to get young people considering how they approach ethical scenarios in medicine, get them to critique a piece of medical research perhaps, or something that's come up in the newspapers. You know, what's beyond the story? You know, how is this piece of research presented in the press, how does it actually differ from the research that took place? So that kind of thing I think is really, really valuable. And I'd certainly really encourage careers advisors to think about developing a society and this culture of success. And obviously, if you've had applicants over the last couple of years, most of the students that I work with are more than happy to come back into their old schools and speak. You know, utilize their skills, their experience, their knowledge, and even applicants who maybe haven't been successful, get them to come back, why they think they weren't successful, what they're doing now, because it can be a really, really valuable lesson. Not being successful. Case in point, one of our medical students scored unbelievably highly on his IB. And I think that's the biggest lesson that he can provide to schools, is that it's not just about your academic ability, it's about all of the other values and attributes as well, and being able to display those. So utilize older students, former applicants, reach out to people, and also NHS trusts, local healthcare services, from the point of view of work placements, sure, but also from the point of view of an awareness of the NHS. Is there somebody that can talk about their role as a nurse or as a physiotherapist and how they interact as part of the wider healthcare team? Because an awareness of that and the wider healthcare team and what other professionals do, I think, is really, really valuable. So consider that as well. And it might also provide an opportunity for those considering medicine but not sure to identify another healthcare profession that they might be more interested or even more suited to. All right, so that might be something to consider as well. So they're kind of my personal thoughts. I think we're going to leave it there. There are some links to useful documents that are as part of this this webinar that you can link to. If you just Google those statements as well, you'll be able to find them, and it's predominantly the Medical Schools Council work that I think is really, really valuable, particularly the work experience guidelines, particularly the statement on the core values and attributes needed to study medicine. So yeah, I'll leave you there, and I think we'll try and maybe pick a few questions that have come out over the course of this 45-50 minutes or so. If you didn't answer a question and feel that you've got all that you wanted, then thank you very much. Feel free to leave. But I think actually if you hang about for a little while, we might just have a couple of polls to go through whilst we answer these questions. So there's a couple of questions here from students. So the first one being, am I at a disadvantage coming from a state school? Absolutely not. Why would you be? You're not seen in any, what school you go to shouldn't have any bearing on your ability to succeed, and it shouldn't have any bearing on your suitability to become a doctor. I think potentially where the private schooling market can be a benefit is access to doctors. That kind of 20% of schools provide 80% of doctors. Access to kind of potential doctors who can provide work experience, but certainly not, you're not at a disadvantage. In fact, many medical schools are placing or using what we call contextual data to identify and support students from non-traditional backgrounds to make a competitive application and to provide them with a kind of an opportunity to succeed. So for example, BSMS, we rank everyone with contextual data, so this idea of maybe free school meals, or that they're eligible for free school meals, or from a low participation neighbourhood living in a disadvantaged area, on means tested benefits or the college bursary. So there are contextual data flags that medical schools use to determine whether a student might need a little bit more support in terms of getting through the door. So it might be a reduced requirement in terms of selection for interview. There are foundation programs available for those students from going to underperforming schools that maybe don't quite meet the grade boundaries but still have the right values and attributes. So certainly look at foundation options, foundation year degrees, and yeah, I'd certainly look at how medical schools that you are thinking about applying to use contextual data if you think you might meet one of those sort of flags. So yeah, absolutely no disadvantage whatsoever. Another question about interviews: would students be expected to do more than one format? So presumably you mean would a traditional panel-based interview and then an MMI take place, or vice versa? Usually not, but there might be within an MMI format, a multiple mini-interview format, a more traditional type station. So that might be run by 2 or 3 examiners, and it might be a chat for 10 minutes. There might be a discussion for 10 minutes. So usually there wouldn't be a 20-30 minute panel-based interview and then an MMI, but the panel-based interview might be built into the overall stations. There are a few institutions that might require 1 or 2 interviews. So I think Oxbridge, one or 2, either Oxford or Cambridge, I forget which one, might ask people to have 2 interviews on the same day with potentially different panelists. But broadly, I hope that's kind of answered your question, that if there is more than one format, it will be built into the mini multiple interview kind of format. A couple more questions around selection. So how much are GCSEs valued? Again, it entirely depends on the institution. I really can't say. Some, for example, Birmingham, value them incredibly highly. Some, for example, BSMS, aren't really that bothered about GCSE profile. Another question about A in English at GCSE, again, depends on the institution. Some who will look at GCSE results more closely than others might expect A's in maths, science and English perhaps, but again I can't say. Those specifics really need to be researched by the applicants or by the careers advisor, and that MSc guidance, so what's on your page now, MSc entry requirements for UK medical schools, it's a PDF document, should list how institutions use GCSEs, and then it might be worth double checking on their website as well. Is health and social care okay for the 3rd A-level subject? Again, depends on the institution. Here at BSMS, we will accept a distinction in the BTEC health and social care alongside A's in biology and chemistry. So as that kind of 3rd subject here, yes, absolutely. Other institutions, I can't say, I'm afraid, sorry. It's again down to doing your research. Any further questions, finally, that we might be able to pick out? Let's have a quick look. So, one about emails from organisations offering workshops to help medical applicants. Are these worth the money? I, being working for a medical school, will not I don't think it's proper for me to necessarily recommend each one. It's really about the value that the applicant feels that they would get from it. So some that either BSMS has been involved in or I've been involved in, you know, they just get talking heads to sit and lecture young people about their, you know, their profession or their specialism, and I don't necessarily think that's of much value. Others organise, you know, mock interviews and mock personal statement and help with personal statement writing, and that actually might be a little bit more value. I suppose it's dependent on the student, on what they're willing to pay. I can't say really. It depends on which each sort of student might consider. So. Another question, is it advisable to talk bluntly about fears that we come across as scatty or not diplomatic enough for being a doctor? I'm afraid I don't really understand that question. Is it advisable to talk bluntly about fears? So in terms of being a doctor, so worries and concerns about the profession, I certainly think it's important to identify that you have a realistic understanding of what a doctor requires to, is required to do and the kind of career that it is. And if you have some worries, then I think that's absolutely justified. And I don't think you'll be marked down by being aware of your limitations and being aware of your concerns. And I think it's important potentially to get that across. I'm afraid I don't quite understand the idea of sort of scatty, not diplomatic, so I'm going to leave that one for the time being. All right. So there's another question that's just potentially come in. Do you just need to meet the requirements? Will you be at a disadvantage to just get the requirements? For example, if you get a B in GCSE and you get a B, will you value applicant with an A instead? Again, it depends on the institution. BSMS, it's simply a box ticking exercise. So, for example, you've got to be in maths, be in English, and that's a box tick to move on to the next bit. You've got 3 A's GCSE, you've got 3 A's at A level predicted, biology and chemistry, and one other. That's a box ticked. We won't compare your results to anyone else. But some institutions will. So they will broadly suggest that something along the lines of successful applicants usually have 8 A stars and 3 A's at GCSE. Successful applicants usually have 2 A stars and 1 A at A level. And if they're saying that, then it might suggest that yes, they do compare GCSE profiles to other and A level results against other candidates. Here at BSMS, we don't. As I say, for every other institution, I can't answer that. So I think that's pretty much it for the questions. Sorry, there's one just that I've been made aware of. Apologies. So it's how can we be a successful applicant towards BSMS? Well, ultimately, I've kind of mentioned our entry requirements and the way that we score the BMAT. So we essentially give everyone a total score on the BMAT exam out of 28, and then we work down our list. So last year, everyone that scored above 16.1 got an interview. We interviewed about 500 applicants, there or thereabouts. And it was determined at interview as to whether the panels thought that they were a suitable candidate to become a doctor. That is subjective, as panel-based interviews tend to be. So this year we're using the mini multiple interview format for the first time, which will potentially provide a little bit more objectivity, and candidates will be scored a little bit differently on their answers and their performance at interview, because we will have mark schemes and structured things that we are looking for. So it's broadly kind of the things that I've mentioned already. It's about engaging well, showing that you're willing to encourage debate and discussion amongst panelists, amongst interviewers, and that you obviously tick all of the academic boxes too. And that you come across as keen and enthusiastic and passionate around science, but also medicine. So I think we're going to leave it there. We've been an hour. Thank you for those of you who stuck with us for the full hour. There is a final slide, I believe. Let me just... so there's refresh links, links that I've already mentioned elsewhere in the PowerPoint, so you will have access to those, I believe, but also my contact details. So if you've got any specific questions, if there's anything that I didn't answer, or anything that you would like to discuss further, there's my contact details. My name's Sam Wickham. There's my phone number. Email is probably best because I'm not always at my desk. I'm often out and about meeting people, being school visits, that kind of thing. So please feel free to send me an email. As I say, if it's specifics about other institutions, I can't really answer them. But if it's specifics about BSMS or more general stuff, then I'll be more than happy to answer. So that's pretty much it from me. And thank you very much. And we appreciate your time. Goodbye.